my MASMID, YITZCHE MASMID, who was a tzaddik elyon in Lubavitch. He was one of the chassidim, one of the Tmimim, but one of the great ones. In YITZCHE MASMID, every mitzvah to him was important as his very soul. Nothing mattered except the will of God. One of the people that I heard stories from was a man of great self-sacrifice by the name of REBBE NANES. And LAIZER NANES was a person with extreme abilities to get things done. And the previous Rebbe had him do things for him where others couldn't. So Reb LAIZER made himself available. He studied in the yeshiva, but there were things that the Rebbe needed to get people to do, and he needed Reb LAIZER's services because Reb LAIZER knew how to do it better than anyone else. So he came to visit the Rebbe, and the Rebbe says, "Oh, you're here, wonderful. Now you'll get me a talis cotton for YITZCHE MASMID, because YITZCHE is not letting me live." A talis cotton means a small garment that we put on with fringes on all four sides, and we wear it under our shirts and under our jackets. Some people wear the tzitzit, the strings out, the fringes out. Some people wear it inside and cover it. Whichever way people are used to, the most important thing is to have a talis cotton, a small garment, four-cornered garment around you, giving you life. Ideally, it's supposed to be made of pure wool. In those days, Russia was in turmoil. Nobody could get pure wool because people stole the wool. Wool was more expensive than cotton, and so they would steal the wool, put cotton in, and nobody would know the difference because it looks the same. It's white, and if you have 10-20% cotton, you get 20% wool and sell it on the black market, and that's a lot of money. So nobody could get pure wool. And YITZCHE, the MASMID, wanted so badly to have a talis cotton that was kosher because his was getting torn, and he needed to have it with pure wool, even though, according to Jewish law, a majority of wool is fine. But he had to have it exactly 100%, without any mixtures. So LAIZER would have to go to someone who was selling on the black market. He found such a person. It was a young woman, and every day he would pass this young woman on the street. She would hand him a little pouch, and he would hand her back a pouch. Her pouch had wet wool, his pouch had dry cotton. And every day they made that exchange for several months. But what do you do with the wet wool? You can't have wet wool around. He was a religious man. The police would test him and check him out all the time. So how could he hide wet wool? So he pulled out the lining of his coat, his parka, and he stuffed the wet wool into his coat. Well, for a day or two that wasn't bad, but as it went on, the winter came. The winter is very bitter. Even in Rostov, in Ukraine, it was sometimes 20 below, and there was no central heating in many of the places. And Reb LAIZER NANES froze for those 3-4 months that he was collecting wool for this talis cotton, this four-cornered garment of Rabbi YITZCHE, the MASMID YITZCHE, the diligent one. Finally, after 3 months, he got all the wool necessary. He said, "That's enough, I'm not doing any more." He took the wool, dried it out, spun it into fibers, then made it into a cloth, and now he had to have tzitzis. So he took the tzitzis that he himself was saving for his own wedding, put in that tzitzis. And interestingly, it was made by a woman, they called her Reb Sorachana, not Sorachana, but like Rabbi Sorachana, because she was so religious and so particular how she made it. She made it better than anyone else. And so he had the Sorachana's tzitzis, put it in, gave it to the previous Rebbe, and YITZCHE MASMID was elated. Nobody could get something like that, and he was able to. The Rebbe was able to get something. Miracle of miracles, was able to get a kosher talis gotten without any questions. And the Rebbe thanked Rebbe LAIZER for his efforts, and Rebbe LAIZER couldn't take it anymore. He says, Rebbe, he's such an external, such a chitz, and such a no-goodnik. I had to freeze for 3 months for his craziness. He couldn't be like anybody else. And the Rebbe didn't answer him. The Rebbe was standing in a fur coat in his apartment in Rostov, and he was freezing in the fur coat. That's how cold it was, in the house. The Rebbe called him over, LAIZER, you see, and he showed him how one street goes to another street, to another street, to another street, about 3 kilometers, maybe 2-3 miles away. On the 4th floor of a 6-story building, in that apartment, Rav Baruch Sholem Khan and Rav Fole Khan, the grandfather and the father of the great Chosid, Rav Yoel Khan, they're sitting there. They haven't eaten for 3 days. They just sat down to eat, to learn, to study a chapter of the Tanya. Should see to it that Jews should have what to eat for Shabbos. And of course, Reb LAIZER went. He got the food that was necessary so that they were able to eat, and they wouldn't starve anymore. Years went by. That story happened in 1920, late 1920, early 1921. In 1928, the previous Rebbe had been arrested. 27 was arrested in 1928. He was sent out of Russia. Sent out of Russia, exiled, never to come back again. And before he left, he made a gathering, a fabrengen, with those Hasidim who he wanted to encourage. And one of them, of course, was Reb LAIZER NANES, who came to this fabrengen outside of Moscow. And the Rebbe told them, Ma'aseh avot siman labanim. What happens to the father is a sign for the children. In other words, the Rebbe had been arrested by the Russian government, and that's a sign for the children that they too will be arrested. And every one of those 15 people who were there in that gathering were all arrested for long periods of time. LAIZER, however, was told by the previous Rebbe, LAIZER, you will be by them for a long time, and repeated a long time. And that turned out to be 20 years. So a long time is 10 years, double long time is 20 years. He was 20 years in prison. And he told LAIZER, if you will determine within yourself, whatever you see has nothing to do with you, you'll go out as if nothing ever happened to you. And that's what happened to me. I saw him in 1966, 11 years after he had been released from prison. He was tall, good-looking, bright and cheerful. His wife was hunched over. It looked like she had gone to prison. It looked like there was no effect of the prison at all. At any rate, and then the Rebbe told him something that remained with him for the rest of his life. And I heard it directly from Reb LAIZER. He says, remember then in 1920, you complained about YITZCHE MASMID being such a chitz and such an external person that doesn't care about people, made you suffer? And I didn't answer you. But I called you over to the window and I asked you if you see what's going on in the streets. And of course, I showed you from miles away. You didn't see. But YITZCHE MASMID saw. YITZCHE MASMID saw that those people were hungry and reported it and got you to act that there should be food for those people for Shabbos. Whatever the explanation, how YITZCHE MASMID saw that Baruch Sholem and Fole were hungry, doesn't make a difference. The most important thing was that YITZCHE MASMID knew when to be concerned about the other person and when you had to be concerned about serving God. When another person is hungry, forget about your service to God. Go feed that person. But other times, a little inconvenience, the most important thing is the fulfilling of the mitzvah. So, you have to know how to weigh things. YITZCHE MASMID knew how to weigh things, and YITZCHE MASMID saw.